I'm just notifying John Deere right now. If you do that, we're putting a 200% tariff on everything that you want to sell into the United States.
For nearly 2 centuries, John Deere stood as an irreplaceable icon of American agriculture, not just for its reliable machinery, but also for representing the resilience and dignity of rural American life. But in early 2025, that image was shattered when the company announced the closure of several U.S. factories and the relocation of its production lines to Mexico. The objectives, according to Deere executives, were clear: reduce operational costs, increase shareholder returns, and stay competitive in a globalized economy. However, the consequences were both swift and devastating. In the first quarter alone, over 7,000 workers lost their jobs. Entire towns dependent on Deere's factories were pushed into economic freefall. From diners to local hardware stores, businesses shut their doors as foot traffic vanished. What was lost wasn't just employment, it was the fabric of American communities. Faced with intense backlash from key farming states and conservative voters, President Donald Trump, seeking to reclaim political momentum in his 2025 campaign, responded aggressively. During a speech in Pennsylvania, Trump threatened a dramatic 200% tariff on all John Deere products manufactured in Mexico. His message was clear: punish companies that abandon American workers and move operations abroad. But in practice, the policy backfired. The price of a John Deere tractor, which previously hovered around $60,000, quickly surged to over $100,000 within just a few months. This happened because roughly 70% of Deere's new production now came from Mexican factories, and was therefore subject to the massive new tariff. Already struggling with tightening margins, American farmers found themselves forced to absorb this sudden spike in costs. But what stung even more than the financial hit was a deep sense of betrayal. For generations, John Deere was more than a brand. It was a tradition, a symbol of loyalty to American soil and labor. That sense of connection evaporated overnight. But rather than take to the streets, many farmers fought back in a more subtle but powerful way. They quietly turned their backs on John Deere. In key farming states like Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri, farmers began switching to alternative brands such as Kubota, AGCO, and Case IH. These brands were known for offering more flexible repair policies and avoiding the strict software restrictions Deere had long been criticized for. Within 6 months, John Deere dealerships across the Midwest reported sales declines of up to 40%. The iconic green Deere logo, once a fixture on barns, farm signs, and pickup trucks, began disappearing from the American heartland. As the cost of production increased, the market moved in the opposite direction. From 2022 to mid-2024, crop prices took a devastating plunge. According to the USDA, corn prices dropped by 37%, soybeans fell by 24%, wheat declined by 35%. This price collapse was fueled by a combination of global oversupply, climate change reducing yields, and weakened export demand due to ongoing trade barriers. For many small farms already operating on razor-thin margins, these trends proved catastrophic. USDA data confirmed that over 30% of family farms under 100 acres went bankrupt within just 3 years, a rate of failure not seen since the Great Depression of the 1930s. But this crisis isn't merely domestic. As American production costs rise, the U.S. is losing ground in global agricultural competitiveness. Nations like Brazil, India, and several European countries are quickly gaining market share, aided by stronger government subsidies, and investment in mechanized agriculture. With the U.S. embroiled in trade conflicts and protectionist policies, these countries are seizing opportunities to expand. The situation raises a critical question: can America recover? Experts say it depends on 3 key actions. First, the federal government must increase credit access and subsidy support for small and medium-sized farms to prevent further bankruptcies. Second, there must be renewed investment in domestic production and supply chains to reduce dependence on foreign imports. Finally, trade policies must be adjusted to enable more sustainable bilateral and multilateral agreements, creating stability, not volatility. Consumers, too, play a vital role in this recovery. Every purchasing decision is a vote, not just for a product, but for the values behind it. Choosing American-made goods helps sustain the supply chains that support rural America. Ultimately, the battle between John Deere and Trump is more than just a policy dispute. It's a reflection of a deeper shift in the U.S. economy. If Trump wins, companies may be restrained by protectionist regulations. If John Deere wins, a new model of globalized production could take hold, one that prioritizes profit over national identity. Either way, American farmers are stuck in the middle, forced to navigate skyrocketing equipment costs, plummeting commodity prices, and a rapidly changing agricultural landscape. Unless urgent action is taken, this trade war won't just hurt corporations. It will fracture communities, upend food systems, and put America's agricultural legacy at risk. Chaos erupts at the highest levels of global trade. The shocker? The United States slamming down a massive 145% tariff on every single Chinese import, provoking an unprecedented economic standoff that's rippling across continents. As American and Chinese officials dig in, retaliation unfolds in real time, igniting a power struggle with supply chains and American jobs hanging in the balance. Who's pulling the strings, and who stands to lose the most? As of April 2025, the Trump administration has stunned markets by launching an all-out tariff blitz against China, a direct response to what administration officials call Chinese dominance over critical supply chains. In return, China has retaliated with tariffs of its own, rapidly escalating to a peak of 125% on U.S. goods. Against this volatile backdrop, Washington formed a specialized task force to manage the storm. Its sole purpose: to handle and contain the cascading impact of the China tariffs now shaking the global economy. Tensions between the world's two largest economies have reached new heights, making the stakes for American manufacturers, farmers, and consumers impossible to ignore. To understand how this economic confrontation spiraled so quickly, consider the sequence of blows exchanged between the U.S. and China over just a matter of days and weeks. The Office of the United States Trade Representative announced new fees on Chinese-built and Chinese-owned vessels docking at U.S. ports. These fees, the statement clarified, are calculated based on net tonnage per voyage into the U.S. The policy rollout is set for two phases, one beginning in 180 days and a second targeting foreign-built LNG ships hitting in 3 years. This wave of enforcement actions comes on the back of a year-long investigation launched under the Biden administration, suggesting the showdown was brewing long before the latest tariffs appeared on the front page. By April 2nd, Washington rolled out a stunning reciprocal tariff of 34% on top of existing penalties, forcing an effective minimum import tariff of 54% on all goods coming from China. Especially striking, for goods already under Section 301 tariffs, the total rate soared as high as 76%. China immediately countered with its own 34% tariff against U.S. imports, effective April 10th, and simultaneously suspended talks over the sale of TikTok, a move with both economic and political undertones. Meanwhile, China began enforcing special licensing requirements on exports of 6 heavy rare earths and rare earth magnets, game-changing materials where China controls nearly all global refining and much of production. As tit-for-tat escalations accelerated, the numbers became dizzying. On April 9th, the U.S. again upped the ante, raising its baseline tariff to 104%, which China countered by pushing its own retaliatory tariff to 84%. Within just 2 days, each side had again ratcheted tariffs to their current levels, 145% for the U.S. and 125% for China, an economic arms race with no signs of blinking. China then took the extraordinary step of announcing publicly that further increases by Washington would simply be ignored. In a biting statement, China's Commerce Ministry declared, even if the U.S. continues to impose higher tariffs, it will no longer make economic sense and will become a joke in the history of world economy. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs brushed off American threats to hike tariffs as high as 245%, bluntly stating they would not pay attention. China also intensified non-tariff barriers targeting U.S. exports, especially those sourced from politically sensitive red states. Compounding the economic pain, China slashed its oil imports from America by an astonishing 90%, shifting its buying power to Canada. In a last-minute attempt to show optimism amid mounting uncertainty, President Trump hinted at the possibility of a breakthrough, yet offered few specifics. He carefully sidestepped giving details about whether talks included President Xi Jinping himself, and in a move clearly laced with strategic calculation, postponed any action on ByteDance or TikTok. In his own words, "We have a deal for TikTok, but it'll be subject to China, so we'll just delay till this thing works out one way or another." Yes, meanwhile, USTR Ambassador Greer doubled down on the administration's approach, stating, the Trump administration's actions will begin to reverse Chinese dominance, address threats to the U.S. supply chain, and send a demand signal for U.S.-built ships. Supporters of the tariffs claim these moves are decisive steps to restore American manufacturing and counter decades of supply chain dependency. Critics fear catastrophic blowback for U.S. exporters and farmers, and a permanent fracturing of ties with one of America's biggest trade partners. Does this spiral of economic aggression create a golden opportunity, or are we witnessing a slow-motion meltdown destined to haunt the global order for years to come? How will this high-stakes standoff shape your life? And will either side ultimately blink?
I don't blame China. I don't blame Vietnam. I see they're meeting today. Is that wonderful? That's a lovely meeting. They're meeting, like, trying to figure out how do we screw the United States of America.
Shockwaves are ripping through Southeast Asia as Vietnam's prime minister lays his cards on the table, declaring a unique bond with the United States at a time when global alliances are shifting at breakneck speed. On April 18, 2025, Pham Minh Chinh stood firm amid looming economic chaos, launching a dramatic plea to Washington even as his government stared down the barrel of a punishing tariff. The world is watching. Will Vietnam's gamble with America thwart disaster or spark an unprecedented power struggle in the region? This is no ordinary diplomatic dance. Vietnam, under the leadership of Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh, is locked in frantic trade talks with the Trump administration. At stake is nothing less than the country's economic stability, with the specter of a 46% U.S. import tax looming, a shocker for factories, workers, and every international investor betting on Vietnam's rise. Just days after rolling out the red carpet for Chinese President Xi Jinping, Chinh sent a jolt through both Washington and Beijing, stating definitively that Vietnam has a unique bond and a relationship with the United States unlike any other. To put these explosive developments in context, consider the dizzying pace at which Vietnam has climbed the global economic ladder. Over the past decade, Vietnam emerged as a manufacturing powerhouse, transforming from a modest regional player to a strategic pillar in global supply chains. American companies have flooded in, seeking alternatives to China in the ongoing superpower standoff. But as Vietnam's exports soared, so did tensions. The Trump administration, ever wary of imbalanced trade and foreign competition, is now threatening a staggering 46% import tax on Vietnamese goods. For a nation dependent on U.S. markets, the stakes could not be higher. Prime Minister Chinh, acutely aware of this high-wire act, is leveraging every diplomatic avenue. In a calculated move, he recently played host to Chinese President Xi Jinping, a visit loaded with symbolism and geopolitical implication. Yet, in a twist that caught many off guard, Chin's rhetoric to the United States was anything but ambiguous. As of April 18, 2025, during these tense negotiations, Chinh declared that Vietnam's relationship with the U.S. is special and unlike any other country. He sought to remind Washington that Vietnam should not be seen through the same lens as other trading partners or competitors. The crisis revolves around four explosive themes. First, there's the specter of the proposed 46% U.S. tariff, an economic sledgehammer that would cripple Vietnamese exports and threaten hundreds of thousands of jobs, sending shockwaves through Asia's fragile supply lines. Second, Chin's direct overture to the Trump administration signals Vietnam's desperation to sidestep trade war escalation, even as U.S.-China competition heats up. Third, Vietnam's diplomatic balancing act becomes even more precarious, considering Chinh had just welcomed China's top leader. Finally, the statement that Vietnam has a unique bond with America is a bold attempt to set his country apart, making a case for preferential treatment in Washington's increasingly hard-nosed trade policy. Supporters of Prime Minister Chinh argue this is a moment of opportunity. They highlight Vietnam's willingness to negotiate, promote fair trade, and deepen collaboration with the United States. Chin's advocates say this special relationship could anchor stability in a region primed for growth, if only Washington recognizes what's at stake. On the other hand, critics warn that such overtures come with risks. Cozying up to the U.S. could antagonize China, Vietnam's giant neighbor, igniting new tensions in an already volatile region. Some observers cast doubt on whether Washington will be swayed by emotional appeals, particularly as U.S. politics pivots hard toward protectionism and reindustrialization. So, what does this mean for Vietnam and the wider world? If Washington relents, Vietnam's vision as a bridge between East and West could become reality, opening doors for American business and Vietnamese prosperity. If the tariff hammer falls, expect a chain reaction, a scramble for new markets, ruptured supply chains, and rising anxiety from Seoul to Singapore. Strategists on both sides see the moment as a litmus test. Can two countries with a complicated history forge a new path in the shadow of China's rising influence? The world stands on a knife's edge. As of April 18, 2025, Vietnam's Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh is not just pleading for fair trade, he's declaring that his nation has a unique bond with the United States and calling for recognition of a special relationship unlike any other country. But will that be enough to stop the tariff tide and reshape the balance of power in Asia, or will it trigger a cascade of economic shock and diplomatic chaos? Where do you stand? Is Vietnam's bold stance a blueprint for regional stability or a risky gamble with global consequences? Subscribe for more breaking analysis on high-stakes global power struggles. Leave your thoughts in the comments below.
Tariffs.
Is a major blow to the world economy,
including in trade and global trade.
No way. Well, we're not going to give up without a fight.
If we don't stand up, we won't have a country tomorrow.
What happens when the world's two largest economies collide in the most explosive tariff standoff in modern history? Shockwaves of uncertainty are rattling global markets, American jobs, and the future of practically everything we buy. This is the meltdown unleashed by President Trump's audacious tariff crusade, now reaching a fever pitch as both Washington and Beijing wage an all-out economic power struggle. Are these tactics America's moment of triumph or the start of chaos we can't control? As of April 2025, tariffs are the new weapon of choice in a showdown that's rewriting U.S. trade policy at breakneck speed. President Trump has described tariff as the most beautiful word in the dictionary.
I always say tariffs is the most beautiful word to me in the dictionary.
And has made it clear throughout both his campaigns that tariffs would be at the epicenter of America's foreign policy strategy. The recently unveiled America First Trade Policy Memorandum set the stage, directing the administration to review a sweeping array of tariff and tariff-adjacent levers in pursuit of what the president calls true reciprocity. The numbers tell a story of escalation unprecedented in living memory. Between January and April 2025, the average effective U.S. tariff rate didn't just rise. It soared from 2.5% to an estimated 27%. That's the highest level in over a century. But the biggest shocker dropped on April 2nd, when the United States slapped a jaw-dropping 34% reciprocal tariff on top of every pre-existing import order from China, ratcheting the effective minimum tariff on all Chinese goods to a punishing 54%. Products already hit by Section 301 tariffs from Trump's first term now faced total rates as high as 76%. China retaliated fast, slapping a 34% tariff on all U.S. imports effective April 10th and suspending negotiations on the forced sale of TikTok. In a bold move, Beijing began requiring special licenses for 6 critical heavy rare earths, materials absolutely essential for batteries, weapons, and medical devices, while halting all exports during the licensing rollout. With tit-for-tat blows escalating by the day, the White House refused to back down. On April 8th, President Trump signed an executive order targeting Chinese origin goods that might qualify for de minimis exemption. Starting May 2nd, duties would stand at either 120% ad valorem or $100 per item, doubling to $200 per item on June 1st. For international postal network shipments, duties would hit 90% ad valorem or $75 per item beginning May 2nd, rising to $150 per item just a month later. The very next day, April 9th, Trump upped the ante again, imposing an additional 50% hike for a baseline tariff rate of 104%. China fired back with a new extra 50%, bringing their total tax on U.S. imports to 84%. The U.S. then responded with a staggering 145% tariff baseline. On April 11th, China met that with a combined 125%. At this point, China's Commerce Ministry delivered a blunt warning. Even if the U.S. continues to impose higher tariffs, it will no longer make economic sense and will become a joke in the history of world economy. Beijing's Foreign Affairs Ministry went further, flatly dismissing the administration's threats, saying it would not pay attention to Trump's tariff numbers game. As tensions soared, China slashed oil imports from the United States by an astonishing 90%, switching to Canadian suppliers almost overnight. President Trump and his supporters argue that these steep tariffs are the springboard America needs for a manufacturing renaissance. Trump insists tariffs will lead to increased investment and job growth domestically. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that in March 2025, the U.S. economy added 228,000 jobs, double February's tally. But in manufacturing, things barely budged, just 1,000 new jobs in March, while the sector remains far below its former glory. Once employing over 19 million workers in 1979, U.S. manufacturing jobs have steadily dwindled to about 12.8 million as of March 2025. Hopes for a total turnaround are tempered by expert voices. As economist Lawrence put it, if we were to eliminate the trade deficit by producing all those goods in the U.S., it would increase manufacturing employment by 1 to 2 percentage points. That's what success looks like. Critics say this tariff storm might slam American consumers and destabilize the world economy. Uncertainty is bleeding into insurance markets, threatening coverage affordability, while Reed Smith's international trade team is sounding alarms daily over threatened and implemented tariffs and counter-tariffs worldwide. So here's the burning question. In the face of historic tariffs and bruising retaliation from China, is America rewriting its industrial destiny or simply risking chaos nobody can control? Is this a once-in-a-generation opportunity or a dangerous gamble? Comment below and subscribe for more no-nonsense breakdowns of the global dramas shaping your world.